Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and the development manifesto for the coming 3.1 patch and expansion War for the Atlas has just then been released. I've just finished reading over it and thinking a little bit about it, and I wanted to just give you my thoughts on what these changes mean to you, the player, or to me specifically, and then whether or not you feel the same way, or just explaining more or less what these changes actually mean. Now, I by no means consider myself a mastermind of the game or anything. I just feel like another guy that plays the game, and this is basically my view on what these changes are and how they affect me and potentially everyone else as well. I'll probably read over each thing individually and then give a bit of a thought about it. So to start with, the manifesto is called Path of Nerfs. So this basic entire manifesto is roughly going to be cataloging just a few of the nerfs, because some things have gotten a bit too strong or a bit out of control in the game and they feel like they need to be brought back. So we've highlighted and explained most of the significant nerfs in 3.1, and there's plenty of buffs in 3.1 as well, they say, and that'll be a pleasant surprise to tomorrow's patch notes. So this also isn't by all means all of the nerfs, nor all of the buffs. Probably get more numerical stuff like, you know, this skill has less damage, this skill has more damage, that sort of stuff in the patch tomorrow. So hopefully I'll have a video up about that, talking about actual nerfs and buffs there too. But to start off with, we have got the Val Pact keystone being changed. We already saw this change from a preview a week or two ago, but now this is a full confirmation. Being able to leech instantly meant that many threats were completely mitigated by high damage, fast-hitting characters with minimal leech investment. Val Pact has been changed to no longer grant instant leech, but instead doubles your character's leech rate and maximum leech rate. This was one of the most heavily requested nerfs in the history of Path of Exile. Keystone is still powerful, but only really benefits from investment in leech. So that's one I very much agree with. I personally just do not like the whole way that the game has gone towards lots of leech and then instant leech, and that completely mitigating or completely negating a lot of the game's tough moments and tough scenarios. But a lot of the time, Val Pact was just completely necessary or a complete no-brainer to put into a build. When completely necessary, that is largely because of reflect damage. So coming across random reflect damage out there, if you didn't have Val Pact, chances are you could kill yourself just instantly to it when you hit a certain amount of damage. So a lot of the time, my characters personally would always just need Val Pact to get through reflect. But other times, Val Pact just became necessary once you started hitting hard enough content that was really severely oppressing your character. And for that, we're talking like double beyond sextanting stuff. When there's a lot of things attacking you, that's when Val Pact started to feel necessary. But for the most part, in the actual bulk of the game, Val Pact and a lot of leech isn't necessary. It just makes things way easier. So I've always been more of a proponent of, dodge sort of based playstyle, where you have to avoid the things that you're supposed to avoid and only get hit by things that you really can't avoid, which there aren't too many in the game of. Reflect being one of them, for example. While Val Pact and lots of leech just meant you could face tank a lot of things and completely just disregard whatever the game is throwing at you. So that being changed is probably a good thing in my belief, but obviously it will make the game a little bit more challenging to some people that heavily relied on that. For the most part, I think it should still be very manageable, and it's still fairly good. It doubles your leech rate, which if you've played a Slayer in the past, you will know how powerful that is. So Slayers don't have what Val Pact do in that they give you instant leech back whenever you take damage. You instantly get your life back. Instead, they give you a really sort of a more aggressive sort of a leech where it comes back a lot faster. So instead of the 20% base leech rate per second of your character's life total, it'll give you 40%, and that means that you get your life back a lot faster, and it does mean that you can't just plain face tank, attack after attack after attack, but you can face tank an attack, step away for a second, and then come back in straight away, like the second after. So it is still very powerful, and it just does mean that you'll have to react a little bit quicker to certain things, and you won't be able to face tank certain things that probably shouldn't be face tankable anyway. So to me, this does seem fine, but casters themselves are probably the ones that are going to see the biggest shaft in this, because Val Pact from the preview, I think, does get moved pretty far away, but being that much worse means you can't really get a lot of other leech rate from the tree since it's all down below in the melee section. It's going to be tough to actually get some sort of decent leech mechanic happening for your casters as an actual defense. And casters may very well have to start to rely more heavily on hybrid mind over matter, or just plain building into some defense and some blasphemy temp chains, that sort of stuff. I'm not quite sure how casters are going to handle this just yet, but I do think they'll manage with the current defenses in the game. It's just going to be a bit of a different shift, and you will likely have to play a lot more defensive than you ever used to, because you can't just grab Val Pact, run in and face tank anymore. But I think you should still be fine, because the biggest reason for Val Pact, especially for casters, was Reflect. So without that, it should hopefully be okay. The next nerf in line for nerfs, I suppose, is its series Acuity. So the gloves themselves that used to give instant leech on crit now has been changed to instead grant Val Pact if you performed a critical strike recently, giving it a slightly different use when compared with the Val Pact keystone. It now fills a different role to its previous one and acts as a way for you to avoid some of the downsides of the Val Pact keystone, which of course just implies that you won't have to suffer the penalties of no regen outside of the Acuity Acuity recently sort of triggered effect. So no regen with Val Pact is really annoying, and that is a good saver there. But however, these are obviously a lot weaker than they used to be, because it's not instant leech, it'll just give you double your leech rate whenever you crit. And that could still see some very good use. I expect these gloves to go down to like 5 or 10x after this nerf, and that is largely because they're still really rare, only dropping off of Uber Series like 1 in every 50 drops or some shit. But they're just nowhere near as good as they used to be. They won't be the same chase item that they used to be. I do still think they're going to be useful, just nowhere near as useful. Still a solid glove slot, especially for casters, to prevent having to get Val Pact, and just a bit of extra defense, but not really as amazing as they once were. We then have ourselves a Slayer nerf. So Brutal Fervor Ascendancy skill no longer grants maximum life leech rate. Hematophagy and Vitality Void now only grant 3% to max leech rate, down from 5. As a result of the changes to Val Pact, other sources of leech were also examined. Brutal Fervor was identified as a problem, more so after the changes to Val Pact, as it was the next closest thing to instant leech. We didn't want to change what made Slayer the Slayer, but we were okay with it taking a small hit given its dominance over the 3.0 ladders. So what this means is it no longer has its 10% maximum per life per second to leech rate, still has the 100% increased life leech per second, and still has, importantly, life leech effects are not removed at full life. So when comboing Slayer with the new Val Pact, it still will be pretty goddamn insane, because not removing life leech effects at full life completely negates the regen or the no regen issue that you get with Val Pact. And if you've played Slayer before, having this is completely crazy. It feels so good to run through Burning Grounds, Desecrated Grounds, any number of shit, degens, bleeds, and still be able to just completely out-leech them with your cannot be removed at full life, and it lasts quite a long time as well. And then pairing that with the increased leech there still, life leech per second, as well as the new Val Pact, which basically will put you at a higher leech rate than you once were as a Slayer, and then you can still invest in some of the other ones if you want to go completely crazy. And these will go down from 5 to 3, which should still be okay. If you're actually investing into them for some extra shit, it still will be worth it, but otherwise Val Pact itself will be the one-stop shop for that extra leech rate, rather life leech per second. So Slayer I think still will get quite a lot of use as an ascendancy, maybe even more so, because there's no greater alternative to leech than this right now. But personally I've been more on the Gladiator hype train myself, and that's even without Val Pact, I've managed to make Gladiator work just fine. So being able to grab Val Pact now and not need to worry about Reflect and still be a Gladiator, I think will be a much, personally, stronger option than a Slayer. But Slayers are very comfortable to play because of endless hunger, basically. Next thing on the block is Mind over Matter. The mana bonuses granted by the passive skills behind this keystone have been reduced. The mana granted is very high, especially at lower levels. The keystone is currently at a power level where further mana investment is still worthwhile. Not really sure why this is a thing. It's not like, this what Mind Over Matter was gonna do when they buffed it was a surprise or, you know, unexpected. It's like, here's a bunch of mana. Oh look, people are taking it because it gives mana. Let's stop that. So I'm not too sure why that's happening. I mean, yeah, okay, people could get a lot of mana and it was a really strong defense. Was that not the intention? I don't know. It will still be completely fine. I think you still get a lot of mana, and you know, it depends on how far they reduce it, I suppose. But even without the bonuses behind Mind Over Matter, you can probably still get a lot of bonuses from mana in general on the tree, especially when you pair it with a Pledger Hands, for example. I'm sure this will still be fine, but just a bit confused by this one personally. So then we have Vulnerability, Despair, and Wither. Vulnerability is now a strength gem focused on physical, damage, bleed, and maim. So they separated it entirely from vulnerability, from despair rather, from old vulnerability, and have made it purely a physical thing. And it's now a strength gem, which is a really nice change because most people would know that getting 150 int for a vulnerability gem as a physical or a melee character was always pretty goddamn hard, and now it's purely for physical, bleed, and maim. And then you have Despair, which is a new int gem that will replace existing copies of vulnerability, reduces chaos resistance, increases damage over time taken, and grants added chaos damage to hits against cursed enemies. So it's not one of the 10 new gems either. And then they nerf Wither because it was a bit too strong, which is very obvious. Wither has always been just pretty damn stupid for chaos things. So down from 20 stacks to 15, down from 7 to 6%. And they're just basically saying that they removed some of Wither potential to put it into Despair for chaos builds, and, you know, separated the whole vulnerability physical from damage over time thing, and Despair seems like it'll be pretty damn good for chaos builds to use, and you won't have to be super reliant on getting Wither stacks anymore, which in some fights was a bit of an issue, in some fights it wasn't. Overall, I think this is a pretty good change. The only slight issue I see is this last one. Witchfire Brew now applies Despair. So Witchfire is purely for the chaos and damage over time aspect, and no longer does the strength vulnerability thing for physical damage builds. And Witchfire did see quite a lot of uses for a basic vulnerability blasphemy, which also let you combo with blood magic, for example, and then get a higher life pool, because for the most part, some of these physical builds only needed vulnerability as their reservation on mana, and this means that it's going to be kind of awkward because you still need to get your vulnerability somehow, and you don't really want to take blood magic. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. It's definitely a bit of a nerf, in my opinion, to the whole physical side of melee builds and all that. Then we have Dark Pact. Dark Pact cast using your life no longer has bonus radius, and the damage bonus has been reduced from 95% more damage with hits and elements when using your life to 76% more. Own life spending Dark Pact builds were dealing too much damage over too large an area, granting an already very defensive build very high clear speeds. Now, some people would argue that the Val Pact nerf is enough to change what was a very strong Dark Pact self-cast build, but it obviously was doing still a lot of damage, and much more than quite a lot of other spells out there. It was pretty overpowered. This is a fine change. I mean, to be honest, you can still play Dark Pact as totems, you can still play it as, you know, casting onto skeletons and all that. I think Dark Pact should still be fine, it just won't be super overpowered like it pretty much currently is. So I don't think that's too bad a change, and that's just fine in my opinion. We then have Barrage. So Barrage, obviously extremely amazingly strong, and it now no longer has the additional projectile enchantment available in Merciless Labyrinth, which was +1 to projectiles. The equivalent endgame Labyrinth enchantment now grants +1 Barrage projectile, down from 2. So they removed the 1 from Merciless and put the 1 into Uber Lab. And basically, they say the additional projectile made this skill and enchantment combination the superior choice for bow wand users. We want to ensure that there are several viable options for these characters. Unless we see some absolutely huge buffs to some other attacks, that's not going to change based off of this little change here. I mean, yes, the Barrage enchantment on your helm was completely broken compared to basically every other enchant out there, except for a few other little skills. But this isn't going to change the game for that. A lot of my Barrage characters never even use this helm enchant because it's overkill, it's completely unnecessary. Once you get Dying Sun happening, an additional enchant Corrupted, an additional arrow additional arrow corrupted on a quiver or even your bow, an additional arrow on Deadeye or Deadeye from Scion Ascendancy. All of that just serves to put Barrage way ahead of every other skill, and it's not really going to matter if you can't get Barrage over here for your endgame lab enchant, because it's still mechanically, or just, plain number-wise, a lot better than any other of the bow or wand skills. So we'll have to see some pretty big buffs there, or some pretty big nerfs to Barrage for that to actually make a difference. Now Doom Fletch over here got a slight nerf. Both of them went from 110 damage to 100% damage. That's the first version, and from 110 to 100 on the Prism version, and as well as that, they removed the critical strike value. They say Doom Fletch Prism was providing some of the highest damage numbers of any bow in the game, so it has been reduced. It's still likely the best bow. It probably is still likely the best bow, but I'm not a fan of the way this change was made, because having no crit just means it's going to have a more inconsistent feel to the build, and trying to hit as much crit chance to be a consistently critting build is a very nice thing to have, and it feels really good for a character. You'll still have lots of damage in your Doom Fletch build, you'll still make really good Doom Fletch builds, you'll probably have to use crit strike gems more than you may have used in the past, but it just means you'll crit a lot less and have a few spikes in your damage. So I would have preferred if they went from 110 to 65% damage or something, and left the crit alone. Personally, I thought that would have been more fun, but this will still be fine. It's just a little bit of a nuisance to have to then build up your crit and sometimes have inconsistencies in your crit. The next one up is Queen of the Forest. It now has 200 to 240% increased evasion rating, down from 240 to 380. So, pretty big nerf, but overall will still give a lot of evasion, and the movement speed bonus this item can provide has been capped at 100% for all versions. So then they go on to say that some people have been hitting way too high movement speed bonuses from this item, hitting 60 to 80,000 or so evasion through Pathfinder, flask buffs, and all of that, and they've been running around way too fast. I think this is fine. Capping it at 100 is still okay, and nerfing its evasion a bit is okay, because it provides like 3,000 evasion. Otherwise, it will still provide something like 2,000, still be pretty useful, and still being able to get up to 100% is still a very tantalizing option for a lot of characters to be able to, push your movement speed and clear speed just a bit faster. No longer being able to go to 200-300%, that's fine, I think. That's not really a problem, and shouldn't affect most of us, as they say. This cap is unlikely to affect the average use of this item. Then we have the Rise of the Phoenix, which just got a slight nerf, well, pretty big nerf to be honest. Max fire res granted has been reduced to 5% from 8%. Life regen has been increased to 15 to 20 from 6, that's per second. And new versions now also grant 40 to 60 life, which is fairly nice, I suppose. They say that it just granted too much fire res and made more than any other shield provided for any other max resist type. It's made it far too easy to max out fire resist on a Righteous Fire character. Other bonuses on the item have been added or increased to have the item remain useful for other builds. It's still pretty good. 5% is still a fairly large amount, and then the extra life makes it a little bit more desirable to still use, and honestly I think it should still see plenty of use. I'm not a big RF user myself, but I do think it will still make some use in those builds. Those builds still get plenty of regen and mana regen and mind over matter and all kinds of that stuff, and I don't think 3% less off of the Rise of the Phoenix is going to break any of those, but it will make it just a little bit harder to build around. And then lastly we have what is a completely necessary and useful change: experience changes for high level characters. Each league, the race to 100 is over more quickly than the previous one. As players become more efficient and the experience available gets larger. We receive overwhelming feedback, including from top racers, that this process should be made longer. We're going to be careful though and just adjust it a bit at a time. In 3.1, this takes the form of a small additional experience penalties at levels 95 to 99 have the following effect: 6.5, 11, 18, 28, and 40, all the way up to 99 to 100. Basically, that won't affect most of us because I've had like 3 characters past 95 maybe. One of them's at 95, one at 96, one at 97. I'm pretty much never going for 100 anyway because it just seems like a colossal waste of time to me, and I'm not racing to 100 ever because it is really soul crushing. It's, 20 hours a day of non-stop Path of Exile grinding the endgame maps over and over again, which is really quite boring in my opinion. At least when you just force yourself to do it and throw yourself at it. And the only reason you do that is when there is a vast amount of competition, and it really does bring up the fun there. And recently I've been nowhere near that level of competition, so the fun just isn't there for me. So basically these changes don't do anything for me, but it does make leveling past those levels very oppressive and just unnecessary, I think, for the majority of us that may want to try and get 100 just for your own personal challenge at some point. It was already really hard for us, and it's just even harder now. The game is basically being balanced at the top end around the top 1% or so, 0.01%, that abuse everything they can in the game. We're talking lots of currency to be able to run these super hard, double beyonded, sextanted shaped maps, an aura bot, all the fastest builds in the game, and then absolutely no lifing the game while getting to this 100. That's the only people that it's too fast for. The rest of us, I think it's totally fine. So I don't know. No one's really asking for this change in my opinion. And it's only really a problem because they do keep giving us sort of situations where you can level really fast. So in Harbinger, we had beachhead maps. Those were ridiculous. Mayhem, you had, all kinds of breaches and strongboxes. Turmoil, same sort of thing. Legacy League, you had, double beyonds and breaches and all that sort of shit. So every single league has something that just takes the XP up to another level that people can all of a sudden abuse to get to the highest level as fast as possible. The majority of us don't really abuse that, and I don't know. I don't want them to stop giving us stuff that's really fun and gives us lots of XP, but I don't want them to care about someone hitting level 100 in 4 days of pure no life. But I don't know, that's what they think, and I guess it's okay. It doesn't really matter, it doesn't affect most of us anyway, but it is a bit of a kick in the nuts if you wanted to actually grind to 100 fairly legitimately. So that's my entire rant for this Path of Nerfs. My voice is a bit shot. I've been yelling at people all day long about getting my power connected to a new apartment I'm trying to move into. In any case, that's all I've got for you guys right now. We will have patch notes tomorrow. I'll hopefully be streaming and go over those live when they come out. I do expect there will be some good buffs. Do expect there should be some good nerfs. And otherwise, we'll just have to wait and see. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.